My name is Lee Boswell May. I was born in Orange Memorial Hospital in Orange, New Jersey, September 24th, 1945, at that time. And the people of color, the people who work for the town, the police, fire department, we all lived in the area from South Orange Avenue to maybe Roland Avenue, from Prospect to Ridgewood Road. That was the working class area of the town. And everybody, like I said, everybody knew everybody. And it was so nice and perfect, and there was no tension racially, to the point where my parents became afraid for me that I wouldn't understand what it was like to be a person of color in the rest of the country. So they sent me to Alabama for a summer. And this is in the late 1950s. This is right after the Montgomery boycott. Montgomery was near where I was going, Tuskegee Institute. My uncle was in the Air Force, and he was at Tuskegee Institute, so that's where I spent my summer. And I'll never forget this. I flew down, and when the plane landed, my uncle, who was in his full dress uniform, he was a major at the time, got on the plane and took me off and walked me through the terminal and showed me the two water fountains and the segregated bathrooms, and he walked me to a military car, and that's how we got back to his house. All my years, I had never seen my uncle in a uniform unless it was some kind of special day. But for him to be in uniform, that told me right there that it was a tense area, and I had to be on my guard. And then driving through town, you know how we have like rotary signs on Ku Klux Klan? So that was my introduction to segregation. And when I got home after my summer, I had a great summer, I had a lot of fun, but we couldn't move around like I was used to moving around. And I wrote a paper, you know, how I spent my summer vacation. And the teacher told me to read it for the class. And you know what the reaction was here? The average reaction was, 2 bathrooms, 2 fountains, that's ridiculous. It increases the cost of the construction. That's what we were thinking of. We weren't even thinking, you know, that's ridiculous, you know. And that stayed in my mind, that the thought process was so different between racism and equality. It's just a whole different. My parents played a trick on me in 1962 when I was trying to find a college. I got accepted to Pratt. No, you can't live in New York City. They sent me to Glassboro State College, and the dorms were segregated. There were no blacks living on campus. And if you lived off campus, they had a separate list. They had a list for the black kids and a list for the white kids. And my parents, instead of sending my photograph when they sent all the paperwork in and the check for the dorm and all that stuff, they didn't send my photograph. And because I was from South Orange, the school automatically assumed I was white. So I go to the dorm to check in, and the head of the dormitory says, "You can't stay here." And I couldn't believe it. You know, I was shocked. My parents sued the State Board of Education and won. And by Christmas break, all of the kids who were off campus, they had found dormitory rooms for. All of the black, suddenly they had dorm rooms for everybody. The interesting thing is they put two black students. They had to stay together. And then there was a girl who was half black and half white. She got a single room. That we always laughed about that. I'm on the board of the South Orange Maplewood Coalition on Race Relations. I also am the curator of Jazz in the Loft at SOPAC, and I do Giants of Jazz, and that's part of what that all came about with my activities with music and the arts in town. I have been involved with presenting music at the Baird back in the day when Judy Wookage was there. We would have one night a month that we would have like a coffee hour, and we would have a major musician, which is living in this area is really great because you just pick up the phone and they're like 2 doors from you. You know, there's so many major A-list musicians here. And they were always glad. The musicians are always happy to perform in the town and the area where they live, because they get to bring their kids. Their kids get to see them. So much of the time they're on the road, and the families don't get to hear them or see them perform. And I would go to the Improv at night to sing. And this is back in the day when Bette Midler was there. And Bette would open the show sometime. Now, Bette Midler's going to open the show. You know, you're just like somebody off the street. Nobody wanted to follow her. And this particular night, I had signed up to sing, and Bette opened the show, and I went back and I said, "You can take my name off the list." And there's this guy sitting at the bar, and he said, "Don't let that girl scare you. Go on out there and sing." So I thought about it, and I did. And I sang My Funny Valentine. And when I came off, the guy at the bar said, introduced himself. He said, "I'm Earl May. I have a trio at the Playboy Club, and I'm looking for a singer." And he told me to come up to the club the following Tuesday and see what happens. So I went up there and I sang, and in the band, the piano player was Larry Willis, and he hired me to sing. I grew up in a household where jazz was king. My parents, my brother, my sister, my father and my brother would talk about the different chairs in the Basie band, like most people talk about the different athletes on a baseball game, on a baseball team. They would say, "Oh, well, you know, when so-and-so was in, Jimmy Rush was singing, it was a different band," and they would talk about. I wasn't into jazz. I was Motown, you know, that kind of thing. I wanted to dance. But I love the people in jazz. They are the nicest, most loving people in jazz. They care about each other. They're concerned about each other. One of my favorite things is Giants of Jazz, because I'm the stage manager, and they greet, you know, they're coming into the sound check and they're greeting each other like they haven't seen each other in 30 years. We were in, I think at the North Sea, and my husband and Miles were having lunch, so I went down to tell Earl that I was going to go shopping, which always made him nervous when I went shopping in Europe. And he and Miles were talking about Coltrane, and I sit down a minute while they finished, and I must have rolled my eyes or something, and Miles said, "What's the matter?" And Earl said, "She didn't like Train." So Miles said, "Why don't you like Train?" I said, "Too many notes." And Miles said, "I'm glad I didn't have to pay him by the note." The first show was, I was working at the Playboy Club on the weekends, but I needed some extra money. So I got a job with company called AVP Limited. And they managed Hugh Masekela, Miriam Makeba, a lot of the black, Clifton Davis, a lot of the black actors and entertainers. And the gentleman who ran it, his name was Dennis Armstead, he would go out on the road with some of his clients, and I would be back in the office, answering the phone and whatnot. And he was in the process of doing this show at Lincoln Center with Hugh Masekela, and he had to go out on the road, so I got to really put a lot of that together. And in the process, there was a group that was going to open with Hugh called the Jazz Crusaders. Now, this is back in the early 70s. Jazz was not popular back then. People are literally running away from it. So I asked the band if they could take the jazz out of their name and just become the Crusaders. And they thought about it, and they said, yeah. And that was how the Crusaders were born. Matter of fact, on the poster we have Crusaders, and there's an asterisk, formerly the Jazz Crusaders. When Hugh Masekela was down at SOPAC, I think it was last year, I went to see him, and I took that poster and I set it up in the green room. And Hugh came out and he looked at it and he remembered it. And then he said, where did that come from? And then he looked across the room, and after all these years he recognized me, and he said, you, and he signed the back of it. Yeah. Hugh Masekela was easy because he had a hit record. Grazing in the Grass was going at the time. The next show I did was Miriam Makeba. Now, Miriam Makeba had been married to Hugh, but at the time that we were trying to do her show, which was in 72 or 73, I think, she was married to Stokely Carmichael. Richard Nixon was in office. Miriam was from South Africa. And when she left South Africa, she didn't have a South African passport. So other countries had given her passports. Other African countries and Cuba gave her a passport. So she was not liked by the United States government. And getting her into this country was a problem. We had already gotten Lincoln Center. The tickets were selling, things were going good. Couldn't get her in the country. We hired one of the best attorneys, and he said, I'm trying, but the United States Department does not want her in. And I'll tell you how bad it got. The phone at the office was tapped. I realized was tapped. And then so I would try to call her from my home. And then one day I looked out the window and there were men with things in their ears and suits and ties out in front of my place. So I came over here. Now, my mother worked for the courts in South Orange. And I told her the situation. I said, the government has tapped my phone, you tapped the phone at the office. I said, they'll probably, if I call Miriam from here, they might try to tap your phone. She said, they're not tapping my phone. I work for the courts. They can't interfere with my phone. I said, okay. And so I had to come over here if I wanted to reach Miriam, wherever she was. And finally, the way we got her into the country, I called Harry Belafonte. He was doing a show in Las Vegas at the time. I told him what was going on. He said, bring her in through San Francisco. I'll meet her at the airport with flowers and the press. And that's what happened, and that's how we got her in. And She had a sellout concert February 14th, I think it was 1972. The Empress of African Song, Miriam Makeba. And then she went on a cross-country tour after that. I love putting shows together. I love working with the musicians and the talent and seeing it develop, and it's just wonderful. When I ended up like handling my husband's business because he was the kind of musician, he loved to play. And the only thing that always concerned him was who's the drummer, you know. But so if the drummer was right, you know, he didn't care how much he was making. So I had to take over handling his business. And he never asked me how much a gig paid. He only wanted to know who's the drummer. We had 2 cats, and 15 minutes before he walked in the door, I knew what kind of drummer he had. The cats would be in the room with me, and they would sit up and like catch his vibe. Now, if they ran downstairs, he had a good drummer, he had a good night. If they ran under the bed, he had a rough time. And the funny thing is, he would always bring a treat for them, so they knew that he was going to have something for them. But if he had a bad drummer, they said, "I'll get it in the morning." You know, they didn't want it, because he would come. He would never take the tension, have the tension on the bandstand. He would hold it in, and then when he walked in the door, he would be like, and he would, you know, talk to himself, and you know, and just have a lot of tension. And my funny Valentine, sweet comic Valentine, you make me smile with my heart. Mm-hmm. Your looks are laughable, unphotographable, yet you're my favorite work of art. Is your figure less than Greek? Is your mouth a little weak when you open it to speak? Are you smart? Ooh, but don't change your hair for me, not if you care for me. Stay, little Valentine, stay. Each day is Valentine's Day. My husband, if I was in the kitchen, or he would bring his bass and he would say, "Sing something." And he did that the morning that he died. He died suddenly. And he played his bass, and I sang that song. After he passed, I gave his basses to the Jazz Foundation and to a couple of young musicians. But the one bass that I kept was the bass that he called Coltrane, because he recorded Coltrane with Coltrane on that bass, and it's a bass that Mingus, who was Earl's teacher, told him to always record with. So I hung on to that. And then one day I looked at it, and because it wasn't being played, it was starting to come apart. I was over at Susie Q's one night, and Mike Griot, he's a bass player. He does the Blues in the Loft at Sopak. And I said, you know, Mike's coming in, I'm going out, and it was like an out-of-body experience. I heard myself say, "Do you want Earl's bass?" And Mike said, "Yeah." And the next day Mike came over and got the bass, and he said, come on, I'm going to take you, show you where I'm going to keep the bass. And we went over to Mike's apartment, and he started playing, and he played My Funny Valentine. He started, and I sang it. And then I said, Mike, why did you pick that song? He said, I don't know, I never play that song. It was like something from above. Favorite memory is being with my husband. Whether he was on stage or off stage, just being with him, riding home from a gig, we would always, hold hands, or just being in his company. He was the sweetest, kindest man, and never allowed me to do a dish. He said, leave the dishes, I'll take care of it when I get home. But he was fun, he was funny. All the nieces and nephews loved him. My niece was in preschool, and so he volunteered to be the parent to go, because everybody else worked, to go and, on the day that they had to go to preschool, and he would come home, he said, oh, my knees are killing me. Because he would put himself down at the level of those little kids. And he just, that's my favorite memory, all of my memories with him.